Welcome to the regular meeting of the Ojai Historic Preservation Commission for Thursday, September 14th, 2017. Mr. Winiger, we'd like to call the roll.
Yes, thank you, and good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission. Chair McCready.
Here.
Vice Chair Akins.
Here.
Commissioner Hill.
Here.
Commissioner James.
Here.
Commissioner Convery.
Here.
The record will show that Commissioner Quinn has an excused absence this evening.
Thank you. And we'll note that Commissioner Akins will need to leave at 6:15. Members of the public wishing to address the Historic Preservation Commission on items appearing on the agenda are requested to complete a speaker's card and file it with the Secretary prior to the start of the Historic Preservation Commission meeting. Cards are available in the Council Chambers lobby. All comments should be limited to 3 minutes unless additional time is granted by the Chair. Speakers should state their name and address for the record and must direct their comments to the Chair, not the audience or press. While the Historic Preservation Commission is in session, members of the Commission, city staff, and members of the audience are expected to maintain order and decorum and to obey the orders of the Chair. I don't see Museum Representative, I don't see Mark Lewis today, so we'll start with the pledge. If you'll all rise, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I am going to reorder some things tonight because we only have Commissioner Akins here until 6:15, and I see the applicants are here for items 2 and 3. So what I'd like to do is place 2 and 3 first, if you will. Is that okay, Mr. Winiger?
Yes, sir.
And then we will proceed from there to the minutes of June 8th and the other items on the agenda, if you will.
Very good.
So with that, we will proceed to item 2, please.
Can I ask 2 quick questions?
Yes.
First of all, this is a public hearing item noted in our agenda?
Yes, sir.
Second of all, it's been publicly noticed in September 1st, Ojai Valley News on pages B2 and B10, correct?
Correct.
And the applicant who are here and who are asking to do this and their neighbors have been properly notified?
Yes, sir.
Great, thank you.
Also, would any members of the commission please disclose site visits and ex parte contacts? I visited the site and met the applicants.
I visited the site and met the applicants.
I visited the site and met the applicants.
I visited the site, didn't go in, sat in the car, but I met the applicant. Some problems.
So with that, we will proceed to item number 2. The subject is the historic landmark designation for the Smith Hobson House, City Hall. I'm sorry, incorrect. Item 3.
And Mr. Chair, if you, it would be our intention to make a joint presentation on items 3 and 4, so if you could read the description for both of those items, please.
Okay. Item 3 is permit number 1709, historic landmark designation for Westway, 700 San Antonio Street, City of Ojai. And the item number 4 is permit number 1710 for Mills Act agreement.
Correct.
Mr. Winiger?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission. Since items 3 and 4 do concern the same property, I'll be making a single presentation on both of those items. It will require separate action on those items by the Commission at such time as you are prepared to deliberate. The items before you this evening concerning 700 San Antonio Street are a potential landmark designation and consideration of recommending to the City Council, in addition to the landmark designation, entering into a Mills Act agreement. And I'll go into a little more detail about that in a moment. The property owners are Kevin Bagley and Manuel Almeida. The property, as I indicated, is 700 San Antonio Street. Your packet contains the Historic Resource Survey that concerns the property and goes into considerable detail regarding not only the history of the property and the occupants and the owners of the property, but as well as obviously the historic and architectural characteristics of the property. I will not be going into extensive detail about that. The applicant may wish to elaborate further. But the property was originally developed and consists of a single-family home and several other outbuildings that were built by William Armstrong Fairborn, who was most notably the president of the Diamond Match Company in the early part of the 20th century. This property, according to the Historic Resource Survey, and specifically the main house, is considered a late interpretation of the shingle style of architecture that was popular in the late 1800s and early 1900s. It is considered an outstanding example of the 20th century rendition of that style. It is a rare example. It is actually a very special and rare property in Ojai, as it's located on an over 50-acre estate, which not only contains the main structure, a guest house, but there are five other outbuildings that are all constructed in sympathetic styles to the existing or to the principal buildings. There are many landscape features, including specimen trees on the property, some that date back to the original development of the property, and they, along with the other findings concerning the design of the buildings, the settings, the workmanship, and types of materials, we feel justify the historic landmark designation for the property. The Mills Act is a piece of state legislation that allows local agencies to enter into agreements with property owners of landmark properties, which allows them to realize certain reductions in property tax in consideration for their long-term stewardship and maintenance of those landmarks. And in essence, their commitment is that they will invest the amount of that savings and taxes, and usually much more, back into the property over a 10-year period. The Mills Act agreement is a 10-year agreement and between both the city and the property owner, and your packet has a draft of that agreement. It does contain on Exhibit E, page 2 of 3, the preservation and rehabilitation timeline plan submitted by the applicants. They've already made, as you are aware from your visit to the property, significant reinvestment in the rehabilitation of the property, and this timeline also indicates future improvements that they intend to make. So, in sum, we think there's more than adequate justification for your recommendation to the City Council of the Westways property as Ojai Historic Landmark number 25, and recommendation that the city entered into the Mills Act agreement for the property. The applicants, as you indicated, are present. I'm sure they have information that they could share regarding specific questions that the commission may have, and I'll try and answer any other questions you may have.
Are there any questions or from the commission for Mr. Winiger?
Mr. Almeida and Mr. Bagley were kind enough to open their principal residence that's called out in the list of buildings for us to landmark. I had talked to you, Mr. Winiger, beforehand. You had talked to the guest house. I kind of had an expectation that we would see buildings other than the principal residence. I asked Mr. Bagley if that was going to happen. He told me that he had been advised that we only needed to see the main residence, which I was thrilled to see. So not a big letdown. But and now we see that there's, as you said, the main residence, the guest residence, and then 15 other outbuildings that are called out in this. Is it 5? Oh, I'm sorry, 5. Yeah, sorry. I'm still regaining my my brain after Sunday night. 5 other outbuildings, And so does it suffice for us in the knowledge that we need to move forward in a landmark to only have seen the principal residence?
Mr. Chairman, yes, Vice Chair Akins, it actually isn't necessary that you visit the property at all. There's sufficient information, documentation in the record here to justify the designation. So I believe that that is perfectly adequate.
Great, thank you very much.
Are there any other questions for Mr. Winiger? With that, I'll invite the applicants, if you'd like to address the commission. Otherwise, we can proceed.
I don't think so. Just that there, I think in the historical report, there are pictures of, I'm sorry.
Can you please state your name and address?
Kevin Bagley, 700 San Antonio Street.
Thank you so much.
There are pictures in the historical report of the guest house and the other outbuildings too, so if anybody wanted to look at that, just to let you know, everything that has been done is in the same vein as what was done in the main house.
Thank you.
So you're welcome.
I actually have a question.
Commissioner
Hi,
Convery?
I'm Cindy. We didn't meet.
No,
I
hi.
wasn't available that day, unfortunately, but Chairman McCready pointed out earlier that your house is on the market. The house is that correct?
Yes. We have some family circumstances in Portugal. Manny's nephew, Manny's family has significant properties in Portugal, and his nephew, who was helping to manage everything, he's young, was diagnosed with leukemia not long
sorry.
ago, and his battle is going to be a heavy one. So we didn't intend on selling the property at all. This was going to be our home, but the distance between here and Portugal is just too great for us to be going back and forth to manage what needs to be managed there with the family businesses. So it's a sad time for us right now.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
Thank you.
I saw that Nancy Kojovinas is.
Yes.
So I don't know if Claire might have mentioned to you, but the house that I got into the Mills Act on Foothill Road, Ginger Wilson lived there before she bought your
okay.
house. So it's sort of like a small world thing. But and I went through the Mills Act process. And Nancy also sold that house for me. And Nancy's come to me a couple of times with Mills Act questions for property. She had a property on Foothill, and she may have discussed it with you, that sold, and it was a Mills Act house, and the owner had questions and that kind of thing. And so I was a little bit, I'm really happy that you're applying for a Mills Act, but I was a little confused because I saw it was for sale. I was sad about that.
Yes.
But I'm really pleased about this because it will preserve the house.
And that's something we were thinking about also, when the day comes, you never
Yeah.
know how long something's going to take to sell, but when the day comes, to know that everything we have done is going to be preserved and will be kept that way, which is very important to us.
And the owners who buy them, the Libby house, he was really appreciative of the fact that it was a Mills Act house.
Yes.
And that house that Nancy sold, which is the Libby Gatehouse across the street,
Okay.
is also a Mills Act house.
Yes,
So-
and it's not, because we love Ojai, as I said, we didn't intend on leaving, but just logistically, it's just too much for us to do what we have to do. So we, intend to get something else here again someday, hopefully after everything's cleared up, but to have such a large property and manage it long distance is just,
Yeah, it's a lot.
it's a lot.
It's a lot. Well, thank you for
Thank you.
answering that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Akins?
Just a couple things. One goes back to Mr. Winiger, sorry for not doing this earlier. When the group prepared the historical report, they kept messing up what William Fairburn's actual name was. We have William Armstrong, William Fairburn, William Armstrong Fairburn. So they put that in the report. That was copy and pasted to another section and copy and pasted to a second section. So it's just kind of sloppy. And in my professional profession, little mistakes just mean there may be big mistakes. So again, that's in 3 different parts throughout this report. I do appreciate, again, being on the museum board with Claire, who's here. I do appreciate that the historical report did reference those pictures that I shared with you in the tour as comparisons to today versus 1927. I like to promote the museum as being the repository for all things historic here in the Ojai Valley. The third thing is, shortly after We had been endeavoring to do a historical, or an oral report with Ginger, well, first with John, then he passed away, and then with Ginger, and had got that agreement, and then unfortunately, she took a turn for the worse and passed away. But the family did allow me to walk the grounds, all 50-something acres. The caretaker, the groundskeeper, was there at the time, so it was. And this goes back to the comparison pictures. So there's pictures of current, and there current pictures and pictures from 1927. If one were to walk the grounds, you would see many of those 1927 items still on the grounds. The only one, as we discussed, that we couldn't find or didn't know about was that long, beautiful table that was there. So these buildings are, the outbuildings are still there, still semi-functional, maybe that one in the very back that has the open front facing south. The picnic area, the barbecue, many of those items that were shown in the 1927 pictures are still there. So it is indeed, there also is on the east end of the property a road that appears to come in and cross the property on that east side, that in looking at it and looking at the support for some of the areas where there were creeks going through, looked like it had some historical age to it. So I am personally thrilled having walked this ground. I don't think the baseball diamond's part of your property, correct? Oh, okay. It is. Well, another fabulous historical segment, now still with the Wilsons, is in the back, the south, kind of west part of the property where the baseball diamond is still laid out. Could see that, looked like a board for the score. And so, again, amazing to walk that property, and I am thrilled beyond belief to have you come back to us to landmark the property that you have. And thank you again for the tour.
So, Mr. Winiger, both the Mills Act designation and the landmarking status, of course, go with the property if it's sold. And what has come up here before in discussion is in our landmark properties and our Mills Act properties, that when they're sold, is how is that status and the information and the requirements and the so forth of that status, those two statuses, how is that conveyed to the new owner? Because one of the things that we've had struggled with and had a challenge with in the past is access to our landmarked properties and our Mills Act properties. So is that in our ordinance? Are you satisfied that that's clear? Is that clear to our applicants today? And
The ordinance and the agreement both require that the property owners afford periodic access to the city inspectors to verify that the agreement is being complied with in full force and effect. And we will require that a deed restriction be recorded.
Okay.
That notifies subsequent owners in interest of the land, both the landmark, and I think the Mills Act agreement requires recordation itself as well.
thank you.
I would
Bill?
like to ask if the realtor who makes this transaction with the new owners is prepared to answer the questions, because that we always lose factors of the agreement with the sale of the house, and so that this is a very special property, very, very special property, and whoever the realtor is, it would be nice if that person really went to school on this thing and had copies of all of this material that's been generated by the city staff, and with the wonderful additions that Brian and the museum added to it, so that we could really see the before and after. This is a property that it's almost as if time stood still on that property. We've known the Wilsons, they've been one of our very best friends for years. And I can remember all those wonderful parties and things, you know, we were there every day. And when John and Ginger celebrated their 60th wedding anniversary out on the tennis courts, which was all tended, the baseball field, became the parking lot that night, and it was a magic night for Ojai. There were a lot of people there, and it was very special. So, I look at this kind of as from an emotional point of view, but I would hope that the realtor shares that, how much we treasure this place. So,
Mr. Chairman, your resolution, which would be HPC 1705, making a recommendation for the Mills Act, could include a requirement that it's already in the code, but require recordation notice to subsequent property owners of the landmark designation as well as the Mills Act agreement, and require that that realtors or representatives of the property owner provide this information to interested parties.
Thank you.
I can speak to that, since I sold a Mills Act house, that it was provided and it was discussed. And then when the Libby Gatehouse sold the following year, I think it sold in 2016, Nancy, the realtor, same realtor who's done all these properties, called me and asked me to talk to the prospective buyer because they had some more detailed questions. So she was very involved, with I think she felt legally that she really had to disclose everything, so there wouldn't be an issue. But it really was handled, and fortunately, it's the same realtor doing every Mills Act sale in Ojai, apparently. So it's a good thing.
That's great.
yeah.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions from the commissioners? With that, I will open it up to a motion for item number 3, landmark designation for 700 San Antonio Street, City of Ojai. That would be Ojai Historic District Landmark 25.
Well, I so move.
Mr. Hill? Mr. Akins?
I'll second that.
Yeah.
Commissioner Hill?
Aye.
Vice Chairman Akins?
Yes.
Commissioner Convery?
Yes.
Commissioner James?
Yes.
Chairman McCready?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Item 4, this is for the landmark property to be Mills Act, 700 San Antonio Street, Historic Landmark number 25. Open that up for discussion. Anything else from commissioners? Would the applicants like to address the commission any further? I'll open it up to a motion.
I move.
Commissioner Convery first.
A second.
Commissioner James is second. Thank you.
Commissioner Convery?
Yes.
Commissioner James?
Yes.
Commissioner Hill?
Yes.
Vice Chairman Akins?
Yes.
Vice Chair McCready?
Yes.
Motion carries. These items will be scheduled for a public hearing before the City Council at a later date.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
Great, congratulations. Can I make a recommendation that a copy of this, if it hasn't already, a copy of this report be submitted for the library at the museum?
Thank you both.
Good luck.
Certainly.
With that, we lost Mr. Lewis, our museum representative.
He came in.
He was in a hurry.
I think he thought he missed the time slot.
With that, I will go to item number,
4.
I want to do the minutes
Can I make one quick report from the council?
on,
Composition of commissions. So whenever you think that would
Oh.
be timely.
okay, let's do the minutes.
Sure.
I don't have any corrections or comments on the minutes. This is from June 8th, 2017. Does anyone else have any
I have one.
corrections? Commissioner Hill?
Yeah. Wait a minute.
I didn't even find any commas missing.
I have carpal tunnel, and it's hard for me to turn pages. Let's see. It was in... Here. I should have circled this. Oh, it's in, on page 5 of 6. It's in the second paragraph there. Commissioner Hill commented, et cetera, and we get down to the line that says, Commissioner Hill asked them both speakers if we shouldn't have asked them. It should just simply be Commissioner Hill asked both speakers.
We'll strike the word them.
Them
Thank you.
else.
Any other corrections or comments on the minutes from June 8th? Do we have a motion to approve?
I move that we approve them as amended.
I second it.
So carried. Item 2?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, this is the designation of the Smith Hobson House, the building we're in, also known as Ojai City Hall, as a landmark number 23. This item has already been before the commission on a couple of occasions, and due to deficiencies in the public notice, for which I will take responsibility, we are returning it to the commission in the interest of making sure that we completely comply with the regulations concerning designation of landmarks. You have considered this on three previous occasions, and found that the buildings and the property are worthy of designation. The only exception or comment that I wish to make is that, and we discussed this previously, was concerning the designation of the estate itself or the grounds as part of the landmark. The scope of work for analysis was just restricted to this building. So I'm confident that the record will support the designation of this building and the adjacent historic buildings. But at such time as the City Council recommends or considers your recommendation, I should say, we would recommend that you make a recommendation to the City Council that they consider augmenting this report to provide an analysis that would justify the designation of the property as well. Because of the limited scope, we think that there's adequate documentation to justify the designation of the structures. We think there should be additional information should the council wish to consider designation of the property as well. That concludes my report.
Thank you. Do we have any comments or questions from commissioners?
Yeah, I
Commissioner
have
Convery?
some comments. I think it's interesting, your comment about more information on the grounds, because we did discuss this sort of ad nauseum a couple of meetings, and I believe I sent some information. I know I verbalized it. I don't know if I put it in writing, that the National Trust for Historic Preservation has no information of a historic estate ever being landmarked without the grounds. It just doesn't exist. And I think we discussed that to the point that it became apparent that the grounds and the estate were one item. So to spend more of our resources and city money documenting the grounds, I think it's a little bit extravagant, since it's a clear item of the National Trust for Historic Preservation, and it's always done that way. That's my comment.
By the grounds, do you just mean the trees The foliage or what?
The estate.
The estate.
Everything around. Okay.
Right, the estate's actually,
An estate.
the estate's made up of several properties.
Yeah.
And they're in consultation with, I should say, in consultation with the city attorney, we feel there should be some additional documentation there. I don't think it's a significant level of effort, but we just think that in order to provide the basis for the council's complete consideration, and I'm not aware, I'm not as familiar with the federal regulation, so I'll plead to that.
Would you like me to, I could
That would be
forward you
great.
some
Yeah, I don't
inform-
think
and
I
maybe
received that
that'll save
previously.
the trouble, because, I just feel like every extra penny the city has should go toward paying the water bond. Every $1,000 helps offset that for the
Sure, and
residents.
if that's,
Just me, but,
that can be accomplished,
yeah, I'd be happy to do that.
I would appreciate that, sir.
Okay.
So what is the acreage of the parcel or parcels combined?
I think it's 8 acres.
Is it?
And I'm not positive, but I think it's about 8 acres.
That sounds right. I left the file in my office, unfortunately, but I believe there's a note in the, there was an original acquisition, and then there were subsequent acquisitions of the property.
Okay.
When were the subsequent acquisitions, like the 50s, 60s?
I'm not
A
certain.
lot of them were
Okay.
original.
Commissioner
No, I
Akins?
think they're after the property was gifted to the city acquired some additional adjacent properties. And I couldn't tell you, I'm not familiar enough to
Okay.
know exactly what those were.
Commissioner Akins?
Okay, so I ran into Mr. Winiger earlier today and asked him the question, since the report was only based on this building, or the other areas that we would be looking at precluded, and as he said a couple times, no, they were related to this building and in the same time frame. So the main building, the barn, the tennis courts, all of those are eligible at this time, with the information that we know at this time, for us to do a recommendation of a landmark, based on the fact that we have talked about these in at least 3 other meetings ad nauseum, I think was the term. I'd like to make a motion if I could. Do we need public comment?
Yes.
It is.
Yes, please approach.
Yeah, Bill Warwick, just a question. I'm going through this. Sousa asked me to appear as your liaison this week.
Thank you.
The resolution references Exhibit A, lists the defining characteristics of the property. Obviously, from listening to you ad nauseum, it's an extremely important element of this. Where is the document labeled Exhibit A in this item?
It is actually
So it's not,
a,
so Appendix
In-
A
in the-
is actually Exhibit A. The
No, I
plates,
belie- I
it says
believe-
Appendix A is plates. Is that Exhibit A?
actually, I'm corrected. So Exhibit A should be the object record, the exterior and interior
Photographs.
object record photographs.
Okay, so I just from a purpose of, I just wanted to make sure we knew exactly what was labeled Exhibit A.
Thank you, that should be
in the
more
resolution.
clearly labeled.
So the exterior object record should have it on top of that Exhibit A.
Yes, correct.
I could just tell you, for the purposes of heading alpha issues, just make sure that's titled when it gets to council. Thank you.
Thanks.
So do
Okay.
we need any more public comment, or do we need to open it and close it? Don't do anything?
With that, I'll close the public comment period.
Oh, I had a question.
Commissioner Hill?
I sense that there's something that somebody wants to pare away from the estate. I'd like to know just what it is that is problematic. I easily can see, as Commissioner Akins pointed out, the barn, the tennis courts, the buildings are all created in and around the same time that this building was. Is there something out there that looms as a problem for landmarking the entire estate?
Mr. Chairman, just from my standpoint, I would like there to be a clear definition of the help of Ojai property and its relationship to the broader estate, because those are obviously not historic elements of the estate itself, but they are on the estate's property. As far as I can tell, there's never been a lot line adjustment or a parcelization that creates its own parcel for the help of Ojai buildings. And from my discussions with council, I think that's an issue. So that would be my concern.
The contemporary buildings.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I actually,
Mr. Convery?
I have a comment. I had a conversation with Craig Walker a couple of days ago, and just reminding both of us that even if the entire estate is landmarked, the buildings that are on the estate that aren't historic, help of Ojai, doesn't fall under a historic preservation requirement, or a barn, or a gazebo, or whatever those random structures that are out there. And I actually do have a copy of the deed for some reason on my phone. Don't ask me, the grant deed. But and it states, and I'll paraphrase, that the property is to be used for public purposes. It could be rented out, as in the case of help of Ojai, and structures can be added and removed, at the discretion for public purpose, but not for, for instance, profit or housing or renting. It's for open to the public at all times, as in help of Ojai with their programs, or the gazebo, the community garden, that type of thing. So it is, it's defined in the deed, and landmarking the whole property doesn't mean you can't change the existing buildings. It doesn't really create those parameters. What it does is it says this is an estate and it has to stay whole. You can't sell off 2 acres. Well, you can't by virtue of the deed anyway, but you can't do it additionally because it's a landmark estate. Does that make sense?
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Motion.
I'll open it to a motion.
Okay, so,
Mr. Akins?
so again, understanding everybody's concerns with the estate as a whole, I would like to make a motion that we propose to the city council landscaping, or landmarking, sorry, landmarking the current buildings, the conjoined buildings here, the barn down on the west end, the tennis courts, which are just behind us. I can't remember if there was any other piece of property that we wanted to wanted to include in that, so that we would again landmark this building, the relevant buildings that were from that same time frame, and that we further do a request to the city council for the additional funds that are needed to do an addition, not a new, an addition to the existing historical resources report done by the Provenience Group, and that once we have that information, that the opportunity or the discussion on landmarking the entire estate be brought back to the HPC.
Excuse me, that was a motion?
It was.
I would like to just ask a question about that motion, which is my
I don't
comment.
have a second yet, so it doesn't
Good.
matter.
My comment to Matt was, I think I can provide the information about landmarking an estate via the National Trust, and that would save going to the Proscenium Group, is that what they're called?
Provenience?
And that extra funding and time that's needed, I don't think it's necessary. I have that information. Is that all right with you? Or can we at least start down that road?
Well, I'd like to get something done today, and we're not going to be able to do that today. So what I'm proposing that we landmark today are the buildings that we know we can landmark today, and that we go forward, whether we have to request dollars and request an add-on for the Provenience Group, which I'm told we have, because
I'm worried about that, and I think that's where this started, where the big discussion started, and this is my discussion with Craig Walker. if you break it up and landmark one thing and then wait, let's landmark this other thing later, when does that other later happen? As you can see, it's taken a long time to just do the basic.
Again, I still don't
landmark.
have a second, so I don't think we're in
Okay.
discussion, but
Well,
let's see if I have a second, and if we do, we'll carry on that discussion.
Mr. Chairman,
Chair is open.
if I could make a suggestion, that a motion would be to recommend designation of the structures, the historic structures on the property, and direct staff to further investigate the appropriate designation of the property, whether that's, and that would go forward to the city council for their.
Okay, I'm
consideration.
willing to amend my motion to that. However, I still think, as I do that, I still think it's important to get into the record the fact that we do want this to go forward. Whether that is a request for dollars in to do the provenience group, which is what I've been told we need to do in order to be able to landscape the entire property. Landmark the entire property. I didn't make that up. I've been going to meetings ever since we approved this, waiting for it to come before council and being surprised at council meetings. So I will amend my motion to what Mr. Winiger suggested.
I second that.
Vice Chairman Akins,
Yes.
Commissioner James,
Yes.
Commissioner Hill,
Yes.
Commissioner Convery,
no.
Chair McCready.
No.
Motion passes. Related to this item, I'd like to introduce Mr. Greg Grant, the City Public Works Director. We have submitted information to you, I believe, by email and on the dais. You also have some information and a diagram regarding some improvements that the Public Works Department intends to make to improve access to this building and to the adjacent sidewalks to comply with the Americans with Disability Act. So with that, I'd like to ask Greg just to share with you some of the improvements that are going to be made. These will in no way compromise any of the characteristics that you have identified in your landmarking designation, but we just want to bring this to you for information.
Thanks. Good evening, Commissioners. Yeah, I think this is a brief recap just to make sure understanding of some improvements we're proposing for out front of the City Hall. So it's adjacent to the potential landmarking, so I wanted you to be aware of it. So the council had asked that staff supplement some complete streets measures in the recent paving project. So if you open to the second or third sheet, there's an aerial photograph that looks like this. And this is kind of what was shown in the email that was sent out to you as well. And that's, you can have, we're looking to the north.
You have a large version of it too.
Oh, you got it. Okay, great. Okay, the one that went with the email, right? Yeah. So City Hall's in the center at the bottom of the one I just passed out. And you can see this green strip.
Mm-hmm.
That green strip, our intention is the whole frontage of the City Hall property is to put a rock curb, kind of like the Arbolada has. So it's going to be a river rock curb. So the same thing you see is throughout the Arbolada. And that we're trying to help preserve the health of the trees out front. They've been stressed, like everything, through the drought, and I think it's a major part of the character of the City Hall. So the intention is to cut away about 3 to 4 feet of the asphalt out there and put this rock curb to push and create a landscape pocket out in front that'll help, will loosen up the soil and add mulch to all that frontage and create kind of a landscaped pocket. And but against that wall out front, we're also trying to create an ADA path. So when you walk out the front walkway, there'd be a sidewalk right in front of the wall out there, which would go that way. It'd be an ADA being Americans with Disability Act accessibility compliant sidewalk going across the front of the wall, right tight to the wall, and across the Help property. That's what you see is the gray area, and then taking a right and going up Blanche Street. And so that was one component. And to assure we don't impact those oaks negatively, we're using a special material that is 2 pages later. And you'll see some crew in orange shirts placing this material. But this seems to be the best most durable product out there right now that you essentially put on the surface without having to dig up. You know, the typical sidewalk, you're going to have to dig up and compact the soils and place concrete on top of that for 4 inches, and it can be detrimental to the roots of the tree, and it stops permeability in air from accessing the trees. So with this form, you lay it right on the surface, right out front, and it'll be a nice, subtle appearance that provides that ADA access, which we need to get to City Hall. So going back to, I guess, the plan view of it, we're also proposing the red stripe is directly leaving that same walkway and getting to the ADA parking across the street. So that'll be the brick that's in, it's the permeable brick pavers that's in the pictures, it was after the Orange Crew working there. So I think that's a tasteful color. It's kind of a little bit different color than the asphalt, but it's a very dark burgundy sort of brick color and a herringbone pattern. And it's permeable as well, so that helps the trees out, as well as it makes it more apparent when you're driving down the road. You'll see that crosswalk, and it makes it more prominent for people who have ADA accessibility issues.
So where would the permeable pavers go?
So
Against the wall, or is that the brick?
Looking at the plan view, the against the wall is that floating sidewalk, which is
That I see the people in the orange shirts laying.
yes.
And the brick is for the crosswalk.
Crosswalk, it's anything orange, crosswalk, and it accesses the parking spaces across the street.
Oh, it's just the crosswalk and not the whole street.
Right, not the whole street, no.
Yeah, how wide is that?
I think it was 10 foot total.
Okay.
It'll have a concrete ribbon on each side to protect it to make sure it's stable. So I think if you can imagine the entire frontage, I guess we did this one picture. It was a quick one that we sent out in the email. And this kind of perspective from a Google Street View. And you can kind of see the yellow lines. That's where we'll have River Rock in a format very similar to what the Arbolata has.
Just like a single line of River Rock like they have around all their.
That'll be the border, a curved border between the asphalt and the planter. And then it's on the back side as well to separate the sidewalk from the planter on that side as well.
On both sides.
Mm-hmm. You won't need it up front against the they call it Terra walk, this material that's in the red line up there.
So then the white line is to the right of the green line?
That's gravel.
Oh, the white line, yes, that's existing pea gravel that's out there. We were considering doing the Terra walk there, but we need it in this one area. We don't really need it over there, and it's a fairly expensive product. So yeah, we're just leaving the pea gravel is out there.
Is that compliant?
No. No, we have limited funds, so we're focused on ADA compliant out to the parking spaces and up Blanche Street. And you can see the path will be, the ADA compliant path will be across Santa Ana Street.
Uh-huh.
And then we'll have an ADA compliant path which will go right and down Santa Ana to Ventura, and it'll go all the way down Ventura that direction.
So that you can get to town.
So you can still get at least down to the bike path.
I
And
got you.
it doesn't, and it extends, that actually does extend all the way to town, that sidewalk over there.
Okay.
So I want to bring this up, it's adjacent to the landmarking, just so you're aware of it. It's happening soon, and if you had any comments that we could try to incorporate, I'd be glad to do that. But I think we're being very careful to really restore a lot of the character of the front with that River Rock frontage, and to assure that the trees are healthy, to help assure, because the drought really has had a major impact on trees throughout the whole state as well as the city.
Mr. Wyrick?
A quick question I'd like to address the board and perhaps the commissioners, perhaps Mr. Grant has to answer it. I believe ADA requirements require a zero curb line transition, include truncated domes between walking out from City Hall and getting into the street. And I know the truncated domes do come in different colors, which are allowed, that could match the permeable pavers and the crosswalks. So I was wondering, I don't understand why that could be ADA compliant without the truncated domes at the zero curb transition.
Right, it's true. We'll have to have truncated domes, and there's quite a few. The color we've used throughout most of the city was that colonial red you'll see out there. It's kind of a darker red. And there is a more expensive product which you can use, which is a brick that,
Yeah, it's an actual brick paver you can use,
right,
but I didn't see it on the drawing, and I think it's required.
right.
Okay.
I have a question. After you, if you're standing in front on crossing the street, you come into the pathway that leads directly into the city hall. I noticed that you have just put a bed of asphalt in there. Wouldn't that have looked a little better with those pavers there?
Exactly. And we propose to remove that temporary asphalt put out
Oh,
there.
that's temporary.
So it'll be the brick walkway, the permeable brick pavers, all the way up to the concrete
Okay.
sidewalk.
Okay.
Mhm.
So,
So I was really looking, I just wanted to make sure you're aware of this.
okay.
I think it's certainly,
So you didn't get any angry phone calls from us?
exactly, we're not sneaking anything in, but it is. Right. And I think we're doing pretty much all measures we can do with that, nice rock appearance we'll have, that we're not doing a concrete curve.
Have
and
you
all
seen the perma-walk material in person?
that. Perma-walk? The one that we're using, the TerraWalk?
TerraWalk?
I'm sorry, but I haven't. I've only seen all kinds of photographs of it, and it seemed to
Do we
be.
have it in the valley?
So, will you be presenting that to council?
No, I think that there's limited options really on this floating type sidewalks that are available, and this versus the other ones as well. I think it has the best appearance we can expect. I think it's also, the great part about this is it's somewhat of a pilot. We put it out there, and if it's movable, changeable, we can, if somebody really felt the appearance wasn't good, we can jettison it and reuse it as well.
All right.
It's not lost.
Right.
Mhm.
Is
Any
it
other-
kind of like a linoleum?
It's more like they try to make it a concrete appearance, a darker gray concrete appearance. It is a recycled plastic product, which may not sound great with a historic building, but I think it is a subtle color that, will be fairly minimal of any, you won't notice that out front in a substantial way, especially with that river rock and all the mulch and everything we're putting out there.
Thank you.
Mhm. Okay, thank you.
Chair, before we move on from item 2, I have
Okay.
one quick question.
Go ahead.
Especially with the Nordhoff Grammar School coming up. And so how do we decide the requirements for landmarking? Where do we go from here? I mean, Commissioner Convery is going to present the information she has. I'm guessing that will go to you, Mr. Winiger, but
Yes.
who decides?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
Vice Chair Akins, with respect specifically to the Ojai Grammar School.
Well, it applies to this property
well,
also.
that, I will consult with the city attorney specifically on that. And determine what recommendation, along with the city manager, what recommendation to make to the city council.
Thank you.
So you're saying next steps. My concern is that the grounds will be forgotten. It'll not get onto the agenda and it'll float away.
Well, let me ask you a question. Mr. Winiger, do I forget things?
Not you.
No.
Not you. I meant the system.
Yeah, well, I'm a dog with a bone, so,
Yeah.
Okay,
yes.
good.
Yeah. That's why I come to council meetings.
And I assure you, we've already raised the issue, so the issue of the estate will be integrated with the whole report.
And again, I mean, we're talking about here for these grounds, but again, going back to what we previously did, we previously recommended to the council that the entire Nordhoff Grammar School property be recommended for landmarking. And so it begs the same question as we have here with this property.
That is correct.
And so that's why I feel like we need to get this resolved quicker rather than better, because we run into the same question when we get to the Nordhoff Grammar School.
Agreed completely, and with respect to the grammar school, I was going to mention this under planning report. Because of the issues that have been raised by the district, by the Board of Trustees, and by subsequent communications from the superintendent, I will be having further consultation with the city attorney and city manager, and I wanted the commission to be aware that we may have to require some additional evaluation and reevaluation of the report that was prepared for the grammar school to make sure we have sufficient justification for findings that the council would need to make, and the commission, frankly, because it will come back to you for consideration for all the elements that were identified in the initial designation. So we will be revisiting that report, if you will, perhaps to provide additional basis for a subsequent decision by both the commission and the council.
Okay.
In
I was going to
regards-
bring that up in the commissioner comment period, so let's
in-
stay. Commissioner Hill?
Yeah, in regards to what you just said, I noticed that there was on the website, there was a misinterpretation of when that meeting would be, and it said it was to be determined as the end result of that, and do we know when that's been determined to be?
Well, tentatively, we were intending to bring the item back to the Historic Preservation Commission
Right.
in October.
Okay, because it said in the newspaper evidently
Yes.
got it wrong, and they said September 12th, and now,
Okay, let's take this, when we can have a more full conversation about this in the commissioner comment period, so let's stay on
Okay.
track here and go to the Annual Historic Preservation Award. Have a nomination from Mr. Akins.
Do we have any staff report? Nope.
No,
Information's in here.
Just
Item-
it's
We're
not-
on item 5, so
just it's time for your annual consideration
No,
of
we
any
haven't got there
nominees
yet.
for the
that
historic.
wasn't
Yes.
the DOT that we just did. The DOT is whole another ballgame.
Mr. Akins?
So, as someone a group to consider for the Annual Historic Preservation Award, and people in the community have shared this with me, I would suggest that we recognize the Terramina community. They were the ones who worked over the years in order to, and, with some opposition, a lot of information, a lot of research, and more support on both sides, both for and against, more for than against, and filled up our council chamber with, I think, 60-something people who testified that night. So I'm not sure I've seen anyone else that's done all of that work and had all of that commitment and spent those years in bringing to pass Ojai's first historic district. And so my nomination again would be the Terramina community.
Do we have other nominations?
There was one other, Craig Walker. He had emailed me. He also suggested Khaled Al-Anwar because of the work Khaled has done in the support of keeping in place the Ojai Theater downtown, not letting them use those financial guys to destroy it.
His name is Khalid, or-
Commissioner Hill?
Khaled-
Yes, I thought-
Khaled.
I thought
Thank
we kind of floated the idea around a meeting or two ago and came up with a couple of names to put in our memories and to think about. And I thought they were listed in one of our minutes. And unless I've lost it totally, I thought Elise DePoit was one of them.
We
Isn't she a
recognized
past-
Elise.
Yeah.
What?
We recognized Elise
Oh, we
this
did?
last year with the
Okay.
new book.
One of the problems is that the plaque back here finishes at 2005. And to 2010, yeah, we're
We need our
7 years
engraver.
behind getting the information on that plaque. So if the staff or somebody who is in charge of that could have that brought up to date.
Thank you. Are there any other nominations, or is there a discussion over these two nominations? And at what point during the calendar year do we usually make this nomination? Is it this, or is it in October?
Yeah, it generally takes place in October.
October.
The recognition for the city council is traditionally been the first meeting in December, if I remember the past few meetings that we've done. Does that sound correct, Councilman Wyrick? Okay, thank you.
I think the Taramina community is a good nomination, and I would be in favor of that.
Yeah.
Also in favor of Colleen, because he's gone through a lot. His theater.
Do we have a preference on the commission for one or the other, or who would write the
would-
report?
I agree that the Taramina group came prepared. They had a outstanding report, and it gave us a tremendous amount of history. We learned so much more about Ojai because of what happened as a result of that report.
Commissioner Akins, would be willing to put together a summary or report of?
I certainly would. I certainly would. I'd be thrilled to work with that community.
Thank you.
They're wonderful people.
So we'll just proceed on that basis
As
with the
is
preparation of a report.
Yes.
Item 6, Department of Transportation Caltrans project letter. Mr. Winiger?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Public Works Department has been working with Caltrans and consultants on a couple of different projects related to active transportation, plan improvements, and ADA access improvements along Highway 33 and Highway 150. And Caltrans has given us formal notice of their requests for any additional information. The Public Works Department has been working with their environmental group to provide information regarding the historic properties that are adjacent to the state highways, particularly in the downtown area along Ojai Avenue. And Mr. Grant can provide some additional information.
So I saw the rendering for Ojai Avenue in the downtown area. That looked fantastic, I thought. But I didn't get to look at it in detail. So what is the status of that area for the downtown section?
Well, let me, good evening again, Commissioners. I'll mention the whole project. I can
Okay.
recap it, and we'll go through the whole thing. It'll be brief, but same idea. I had some things drawn up in a PowerPoint previously, so I just kind of modified that to print it here. And essentially, it is an ATP grant that the city secured on Caltrans property or right-of-way, which is all of Ojai Avenue. So it's from the very east end out by Gridley, all the way through town to the Y, and all the way out Maricopa to the El Roblar area. And the intention of these ATP is an acronym for Active Transportation Program. So it's intended to promote more biking, walking, safety, anything to get people more active. And it's federally and state funded. So it's a substantial grant, close to $3 million. And the primary parts of it are that we're adding improved pedestrian crosswalks all the way through town and out on Maricopa.
Passing them out.
I'm sorry, did everybody get a copy, or are we
No.
short? Yep.
Wait, oh, sorry.
I have extra copies here if
On
anybody
my
needs one, yeah,
report.
so, okay. all right,
Sorry.
so. But it's to improve, it's to add pedestrian crosswalks as well as improve the existing crosswalks on Ojai Avenue and Maricopa Highway. And it's to add bicycle facilities as well. So part of that is, it's a proposal that Caltrans has had for some time, as well as the city's implemented as part of this grant program, is to take the 4 lanes on Maricopa Highway and reduce those to 2 lanes, one in each direction, with protected bike lanes on each side. And so, and in any place there's sidewalks missing, there's sidewalk infill. So more substantially, that would be from where Kenyatta Street is here on the edge of town, going all the way out to Country Club Drive and all the way to the Y. There's no sidewalk on the south side.
That's right.
So to add a sidewalk on that entire side. As you're leaving town left, right? Yeah, right. The side without the sidewalk. So that's the. And then in the same things, you leave town the other way. There's infill needed out there. Trying to think of the name of the properties, but across from Soul Park Golf Course and so on, there's gaps in the sidewalks out there as well. So all those substantial areas, with very similar as what we're talking out in front of City Hall here. We're being very careful with all the oak trees out there that are stressed along that stretch. Try to be very careful with those, very mindful. So sidewalk infill and then tree infill as well. So a lot of these areas have gaps. We're looking at adding trees in the gaps.
What kind of trees do you use?
Generally, native is, we're looking at sycamores and oaks is the best trees.
So at the crosswalk at the one that you have illustrated here, which,
And that one,
Sorry.
so the one map, just to go through in order, has an overview of the whole limits of the project, and
Okay.
it highlights the pedestrian crosswalk improvements. You can see them all through town,
Okay.
existing and added. And I think, just to give you a feel for the project, these extra slides, and then I'll focus on potential historical impacts, is what really Caltrans was asking about. But this slide, the one that shows, it's the Selin Vet Office parking lot, across from, is that across from Suzanne's, I think, roughly, talking there, I'm not sure exactly. But you can see that's the existing park lot, and then there's a rendering below with a DG sidewalk, mindful of whenever we get under trees. And then there's a bike path proposed, and then also the existing bike lane. So that gives you a feel for what it would look like in that area. And if you go to the next slide, after that, next picture, this is the rendering, kind of an aerial overview looking at the Kenyatta intersection at Ojai Avenue.
that's right.
So this is the one that we have frequent complaints and close calls on that crosswalk. It's
Uh-huh.
a kind of a dangerous crosswalk. So we're looking at putting in a median strip
Mm-hmm.
that would allow us to have the flashing beacons in the median as well as the sides. And I think this is kind of a gateway thing where you can say, you're in town, slow down, there's pedestrian crossings ahead. And so that's a way to put it on notice and make it much more visible than it is right now. That's fairly dangerous. But we also have issues, if you ever walk this large bullnose that's shown here,
Which one?
it's here. The idea is if you're walking and trying to cross over to Cleft Vista Park, it's very dangerous. When you look down Ojai Avenue,
Right.
you can't
Oh.
tell which cars are going to bend left, which is what 99% of the cars are doing, or the occasional ones that will come straight onto El Paseo there.
I see.
So what we do is we're proposing a bullnose that comes out,
Uh-huh.
and that way the cars will come up and slow and have to turn turn right tightly into that area. So it'll make it substantially safer for that crossing as well, and tighten up the mass of asphalt that's out there.
That is better. So I love the plantings, I love the median strip, and, it would be nice to engage some of the larger retailers downtown in the planting effort.
Right.
So that we're not looking at parking lots, for, I think, 2 blocks at least, down there.
We do
So-
have tree infill. Where there's not trees, we're proposing to add trees.
And so that's part of this expenditure?
Yes.
Okay.
And there's a little pushback. I mean, some retailers, for instance, on that rendering we just looked at, are concerned with blocking the frontage of those. But the tree, we're looking at trees that either have a canopy initially that's up 8 to 10 foot clear. So when you're in a car, you're looking through and you can see the frontage of those buildings. Or, as an option, we could keep low-profile landscaping. It's all conceptual at this time. This all has a long ways to go to get through Caltrans permitting process and design processes. So we're still easily 2 years out before we get a final design. That's the way it works with Caltrans. And then construction will be a quick summer, pretty much, to get this work done.
Well, the rendering at Ojai Avenue and Kenyatta Street with the median, I just think it looks fantastic. I see the bullnoses that you're referring to. We do need to slow people down there.
I think the
Commissioner Hill?
picture that was in the newspaper is the one that's got the trees shown in the middle. It's a
Yeah.
nice rendering.
Yeah.
That's kind of the idea. You've got the bike lane coming out. You can see that bullnose even sticking out, so now it's not a straight shot, so.
Commissioner Hill?
Would this, with the median, et cetera, would this congest the flow of traffic through the middle of town?
This should have no effect because it's still a single lane through town. It will highlight the pedestrian crosswalks so that, for instance, you see a lot of cars coming to town at 35 all the way up to Blanche, or even actually to the library. It's pretty common. So the intention is to have cars slow down to the 25 zone at this point. So you're talking
Yeah.
10 miles an hour difference over, a third of a mile or so.
Are you going to impact parking? Are you going to change the parking design the way it is today? Because I know there's a lot of people, especially in the area where the bike shop is and the museum is, they would love to have some parking along there, and there's nothing. And then also at the post office. The post office is a horrible situation. I feel really sensitive to this now that I'm handicapped, trying to get close to that post office to park. The lead parking spot at the post office is not even for handicapped. And that right in front of the post office, they have one spot. That's not enough. I was out at the Y where the old Richfield station was, just before you get to the Y. And there's an old gas station in there now, and there's some funky little outfit that's running a business in there. And I noticed that they have to have a handicapped parking spot, and where a lot of these other places don't. And so handicapped people in this town are getting shortchanged as far as accessibility to the stores. And I would hope that somewhere in your plan here, that you're giving some credence to their needs.
I appreciate that comment, and assure you that Terry and I didn't, or Commissioner Hill and I didn't talk beforehand. So that there's a couple of things there that you mentioned that is exactly the idea of this. One of them is to return parallel parking from where it ends right now at the Oaks, and on that north side.
Right.
We don't have enough room to do both sides, but to do it where it's more needed on the north side, because the south side has all the expansive parking and so on. So you do it from the Oaks all the way to Kenyatta.
Yeah, it's counterintuitive, but the street parking makes the city look better. It's funny.
Exactly. I appreciate you saying that. Yeah, some people are concerned, oh, you're going to block the view of my store, but really it makes pedestrians more comfortable out in front of the stores.
Yes.
And so they tend to sit out there. It actually acts as a significant sound barrier. A lot of the noise
Slows
comes.
things down.
Yeah.
I have a comment.
Commissioner Convery?
You know, the recent accident at Kenyatta and Ojai Avenue where I think it was that crosswalk or the one before it where the grocery store is.
Where the woman was hit in the wheelchair.
Yeah, the woman.
Yeah, that was
and
at
it was
Blanche.
a guy swerving around a truck on a motorcycle. So with the median in the middle, it cuts that element. Because I've been subjected to that a lot around here. Cars going around other cars to jump over the crosswalk. So that, to me, is really attractive. And I wonder if there's been any consideration or any investigation into the lighted crosswalks, that pedestrians press a button and the ground lights up like in Santa Paula. Because Santa Paula, driving through, from 126 to take the back road, that's been a death trap. And when they put that crosswalk in, it just stopped everybody from jamming through that area.
Exactly, and that's proposed, to put the flashing beacons like at the library at each one of these crossings to really improve the safety. I think it would have been a factor.
I know 3 people have been killed in crosswalks in Ojai, and I think the lighted crosswalks would have hopefully prevented that.
It's a great it takes quite some time to permit these through Caltrans, but we've got a new crosswalk contracted and underway out at Whispering Oaks.
Mm-hmm.
And that'll be the same thing. It'll be curb extensions with the flashing beacons there to highlight that and kind of say you enter town a little bit.
Are they the ones in the ground that line the crosswalk? Because to me, they're not obtrusive when they're not lit. You don't see them, and so they don't stick up. But when a pedestrian pushes it, the whole crosswalk lights up. So if a car is stopped, someone's crossing, and if the entire crosswalk has a flashing light, somebody's not going to swerve around.
Are you talking about what's at the library?
No, I'm talking about Santa Paula. In Santa Paula, when you cross there, it's almost like little Christmas lights light up the ground.
I should mention, we had those at the library initially.
Were they in the
And
ground?
Santa Paula has a lot of the in-pavement too. They're having a heck of a time. They're actually, I think across the state, everybody's moving. In highly sensitive areas, for instance, at the arcade, if we ever proposed them at the center, we'd be talking about doing that. But it's, you have to to maintain each one of those, which you got to keep in mind, any truck with a rock in there can have a major impact, and most of them can't take it. So they take a lot of maintenance. You have to shut the road down to do it. And the roadside signs are already there, so all you do is push it apart and put that lighted bar in there. So it's somewhat minimal, but it's ideal in a highly critical aesthetic area like the arcade.
Yeah, I think I just feel like they're safer, from my opinion.
So, and we are addressing, I should mention, the other thing that Caltrans listed in their letter is an ADA project that we're working on with them. And that project goes from the far end, fairly close to Gridley. They're trying to create an ADA path from there all the way to the Y. So a fully implemented ADA path means the entire pathway, even when you cross a driveway, doesn't drop at a heavy angle. And it means that each corner you've got proper ramps, and it means that pinch points like at telephone poles and mailboxes and all that, you've got plenty of room to get by the 4-foot standard ADA minimum. Their goal is to get to 6 feet. So that's their project they listed there, and we're coordinating tightly with them. And we are working on the post office corner. That's I think the goal here was really to get to potential impacts to the aesthetics and the historical character. But I should mention the corner at the post office. That ramp that if you're walking up Signal, you can't really even get past that old ADA ramp. And we've been trying to fix that with Caltrans. It falls into Caltrans right away. So we'll be looking at kicking that out so you can easily get by the back of it and having a properly sloped ADA ramp there as well. And then it corrects that problem where you can't see around the corner too. We'll have that. And so there are things working to improve that, and we're looking at those spaces you mentioned out front.
More spaces.
To do roadside, street side ADA parking is very tricky nowadays because you need to have a path to get out of the door that's the full 5 foot wide, so you almost have to cut into the sidewalk and shift it in there, which we're considering.
One of the things is that proportionately speaking, the post office is probably the most used building in the downtown. Mm-hmm. And it has, per capita, the fewest amount of parking spaces.
I appreciate that. So we're working with Caltrans to try to implement the ADA. Like I said, it'll be one side. They have approximately a $4 million budget to get from Gridley into the Y to improve. Yeah. It's amazing how much money it takes to improve all these things. But I'll make sure I reiterate the importance of that to them so we can focus on it up front. So, and to move through these slides a little bit, the next picture was an old shot you probably have seen. Oh, yeah. It was an HPC with the trees in the old days out in front of the arcade.
Yeah.
And then the next shot was from the museum. They've recently used this in some efforts they were reaching out with, and that shows the trees as well. And the drawing, we had a shot, the larger shots, the 11 by 17s. This is a rendering of what the downtown concept is. So the downtown concept is to have a curb extension in the center crossing, as well as the one on the east end over by Bonnie Lou's. And that will improve those safeties. We've had close calls and hits in those as well. And then also to take certain points, the number is fully open, and we have some concern from storefront, although the storefronts are relatively hard to see anyways through the arcade, but about the trees and that. But it takes it back to that old character and provides shade to the arcade as well as the cars out front. So we're proposing that, and if the funding allows, we would even put a strip of permeable pavers in that area as a stormwater treatment initiative. So that's kind of the primary impact would be, I'll go through the rest of these, but at the corner I mentioned at the post office, and then these concept drawings that are the next page, they start on the west end of town as we pull in, and anyways, you can see on that first one, the museum is shown at Blanche. And so that's another historic building, and there's a curb extension proposed there. Same thing to make these crosswalks. We were just talking about Mrs. Labar that was hit at the Blanche crossing back in November, I think it was. And so it would make those more prominent. It allows you to put the sign out on the curb extension as well as the flashing beacon, so it makes it more prominent, because sometimes those are tucked back behind the sidewalk and they're not as visible. So it'd be out in front of the museum, and I guess even to mention the AT&T building, I guess is on your list of potential landmarks, right across the street there. There'll be a curb extension in front as well. So I don't think these really impact in any negative manner the appearance of any of these landmarks. But as we move further into town, in front of the Oaks, we've also got curb extensions proposed there and at the bike shop corner.
Oh, yeah.
And,
So with the turn lanes, you can't have the median, the planted median, can you? No.
the problem is for emergency access
Yeah.
as traffic does back up. That's
Right.
why and Commissioner Convery did mention that. Yeah, unfortunately, we don't extend that proposed median all the way in. It's really going to end half the block in towards Blanche. So if the traffic, it does back up a little bit on the weekends. And it allows emergency vehicles to use that center lane. And also, keeping in mind, as you pull into town, for instance, there's no curb extension proposed on the right side because traffic does back up, and that allows you to use that right lane and make a right turn without getting stuck against a curb extension. So I'm trying to be very careful. You don't need that as you exit town, but as you go into town, it's a nice way to assure you can get out of that backed up traffic.
I see. Well, that sure would, like, when you come around that corner, that's kind of feels like the entrance to town, and maybe that's the best place to have the median. It would be pretty to increase the street plantings. Be really nice. And I do notice there's a lot more pedestrian traffic going west from town now and back into town than there used to be because there are new businesses out there, and that's nice.
Mm-hmm.
It's nice.
And when you had the walkway all the way out to Country Club Drive and out by
Nice.
the Rancho Inn and so on, yeah, it would.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'll just hit the last couple here. You can see in front of the arcade, the next plan view concept design sheet. You can see in the center of the arcade another perspective here, but you can see the tree pockets. And we're trying to be very mindful about the number of parking spaces we lost there. The number of net spaces that would be added to the west of the Oaks, out there across to Kenyatta, would exceed the few that would be lost here. And this is variable based on how many trees we put out here. But you can see the center of the arcade has got the curb extension as well as the east end, kind of at the coffee roasters. And then even in front of the laundromat, which I guess is proposed to be Topa Topa Brewing soon. There's a curb extension proposed there, as well as on the next.
The laundry,
Right.
the old one,
Right.
where the pottery place is.
Is there a pot in the back? You mean the
Next to the
decor?
coffee shop.
Right, next to the coffee shop. Right.
Really?
Mm-hmm. I've heard that was proposed. I thought I saw it in the papers. Right. I think I missed.
Really?
Mhm.
Interesting.
I think they're still planning to have the laundromat in the back, is what I heard, but the front would be put up brewery. Right. So exiting, the last sheet is Montgomery to Fox, so I think the Ojai Unified School District headquarters is a potentially landmark issue. And same thing, that corner has a curb extension. And I think that's about the end of the historical potential impact area. So I just want to make sure you're aware of the project, as well as the Caltrans project which that letter related to. And if you have any comments, we'd appreciate them.
I like it. I like this increased number of trees.
Well, the crosswalk out at Whispering Pines, or what's?
Oaks, Whispering Oaks, yeah.
Yeah, Whispering Oaks. I watched those seniors coming out of their residence and trying to dash across the street, and I just am waiting for somebody that's pushing a walker or somebody to get out there and get nailed. And so that walkway would be good there.
Yeah.
I think all the trees are great, but I am a little concerned about the businesses. Like, they look really good if you put them in this high, but will the trees be already grown like that?
That's what we're being very careful about. We heard that comment. We did some business outreach to be very careful to either have high trees or else low landscaping.
Yeah, okay, good.
Mhm.
Thank you, Mr. Grant.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
Item 7, informational items. Mr. Winiger?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Two items. First of all is that Ojai Day is coming up in October 21st specifically. And I know in the past you've had some discussion about providing support at the jail, I believe it is.
Yes.
And then the other item is that I wanted to let the commission know that the city clerk's office is recruiting for potential candidates for the vacancies on the various commissions. We actually have application forms out at the in the lobby. I think there was someone expressed some interest previously, but according to the records clerk, we don't have any applications on file. So I don't know if something wasn't filed or what the case is. I believe that
We have one coming.
I believe that Vice Chair Aiken shared an email
Yes.
with someone who has an interest in serving. So we just want to get the word out there in the community that the city is accepting applications. I think there are other vacancies on other boards and commissions, but we do specifically have one here on the Historic Preservation Commission.
I noticed that the cutoff date was the 25th for the applications
Yes.
to be in by. How soon after that will the position be filled?
That is up to the council process. I'm not sure. Perhaps our council liaison could speak to that.
We've been without
Yeah,
a member for a long time now.
The process, just to answer your question, is that is to some extent controlled by the mayor.
Yes.
Because the mayor is the one assigned the responsibility of making nominations. And then after the nomination is made, it goes to council. So the key timeline control is Mayor Johnston.
Okay.
So the question ought to be directed at him in terms of, he was the one that makes the, if you look at the commissioner handbook as well, there's a procedure where he decides how to handle the screening for the nominees, interviews or whatever. And then, but he's the one that forwards nominations to the council. So
Okay.
he would be the one in control of that process.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Winiger.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I believe that is all the items we want to share. We want to make sure you were aware of the information that Mr. Grant has brought to you this evening concerning the access improvements along both here in front of City Hall in Santa Ana and on the state highways. So that concludes my remarks this evening.
Thank you. So, Commissioner comments period. I kind of cut off Mr. Hill earlier when we began to talk about the school project. And, I know there's been a lot of discussion, in some of it in the media and the news. And, I think this commission has, from time to time, been maligned. And, without being overly defensive, I think that we had an applicant here tonight that has a beautiful property and wants to have it landmarked, and it's an asset to the sale of that property. So I don't see us as adversaries to the school board, and dismayed by the level that the acrimony has reached any level at all. So, Mr. Hill?
I just wondered, as a schedule, we look back at the time that the Ojai Valley News reported that it was going to happen on the 12th. And that was wrong, evidently. And so it came up as it states on the news for the website for the city that it would be to be determined. I even thought it might have been tonight, but evidently not. But I would like to know a little bit about when that's going to happen. He knows.
Mr. Wyrick?
Yeah, I wanted to clarify that point. The staff did put TBD, but that does not square with council direction. Council direction was very specific, to bring the matter back with proper noticing requirements, subject only to proper noticing requirements at the next available meeting to this commission.
And
So the
And the
problem
reason
with the
for-
September meeting was the noticing requirement.
so it's coming back to us?
That was the direction from council.
Okay.
was to bring it back to, the direction of council was very explicit, subject to getting the noticing requirements exactly right,
Okay,
bring it back to the next available HPC meeting.
okay.
That was, and the problem was the 30-day noticing on this meeting.
Right.
Okay. Now, lately, there's been this other discussion, but I want to caution that I think there's an issue about not following that council direction from my point of view, in terms of when the noticing requirements are met, not having it before this commission. Now, maybe the argument would be more information is needed, but I think that would be up to the commission to decide. Not a matter of staff deciding they want to delay bringing it back to the commission. That's my understanding.
Thank you.
Okay.
So, Mr. Winiger, if this comes back to us, we have a fair amount of,
It's not a matter of if, it will.
I mean, when
Council
this,
direction
pardon me,
is very prescriptive that it will.
when it comes back to us, we have a fair amount of freedom in crafting the language of the ordinance so that we could insert language that was designed to allay some of the worst fears of the school board members, such as permitting log jams and access to hearings and so forth and so on, things that I've heard and read. I mean, we have freedom to craft an ordinance for this particular landmark that takes care of some of those issues, I think.
I think that's correct, Mr. Chairman. I believe you have latitude to try and address some of those concerns. Certainly, I've not received direction to deviate from the council's direction to staff. I know that the city attorney and I had discussions based on communications from the district about the legal defensibility of the supporting documentation right now, given the issues that the school board has raised.
I see. Any other commissioner comments or questions on this particular?
I just hope that, I have heard also a lot of the criticism and a lot of the charges that have been put up against this commission. I would hope that by the time we get to a hearing status, that we can be civil and conduct this thing in a real professional manner,
Yeah. I have a
rather than
comment.
people screaming it.
Along those lines, this commission is about historic preservation. We're supposed to landmark historic buildings.
That's
You
what
know,
we do.
it's nothing
Yes.
personal.
Yeah,
So,
and we are an advisory board.
sorry about that, but I know, it's a very odd situation when people take issue with preservation for other means.
I just wanted to take this opportunity to, say that we want to be a collaborative process, and we don't see the landmarking of the property as an encumbrance to any future uses for that property. So, and it's my feeling that if it were never landmarked, and say the school board sold it or leased it or, to a different user, that it would come to us anyway for review, because it's in this downtown historic district. So I'm hoping we get through this on a higher level.
Right, exactly.
With that, if there aren't any other commissioner comments or questions, or you have anything else, Mr. Winiger?
No, I just would point out, once you're done with the commission comments, to offer the council liaison.
Oh, Mr. Wyrick. I'm sorry.
I'm done, and I just amplify that I think that's the overwhelming, what I heard from my council colleagues regarding the whole issue with this Chaparral School, is that it needed to get back to you in proper form, in proper order, for proper public discussion of the entire issue. And we just wanted that happening as soon as possible.
Thank you.
And so that was the confidence we have in you is, I think, expressed by that sentiment, by that direction.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Hill?
I just, I made one of these comments about 6 months ago or so, I'm not going to be readily available and for the next couple of months. I have been diagnosed with a number of ailments, and I fell on the stairs the other day, and it took the fire department to haul me out of there and to the hospital. And so I've seen a neurosurgeon and an orthopedic surgeon. I have 5 operations on the docket for me. And so getting in here, it takes us, for my wife and I to go about a mile from here. It takes us about a half hour to 45 minutes to make it to the car and to get down here to the meeting. So you might not see my face all the time, but I'm always available by phone or whatever, or somebody can drop in and let me know, and I'll tell you what my thoughts are on things. But I really do appreciate all that this commission is all about. So,
Well, I will be pestering you with questions and for advice, as I always have.
right, you have.
With that, we are adjourned.
Thank you.
All right.
We got through quite a bit. I'm
Okay. That's got to keep putting it out there.
I mean, yeah.
It's a great
Yeah.
Well,
It's got a bunch of.
I don't think anybody wants to see it.
I love seeing Connie's book.
Right.
It seems something to do, which makes life easier for me.
My mother's wanting to do that one too, you know. Susan and I are stepping up, taking down on,
Yeah.
you know,